Okay, hello and welcome back to ZoyncTV. I'm Andrew Weir, and this is part 2 of the Blender 2.64 Beginners Tutorial Series, which is going to be focused on modelling. So, we're going to just focus on this cube here, since it is the basic thing which appears in the scene whenever we start up Blender. And we should be familiar by now with how to move the screen, how to get around the menus, but not actually necessarily knowing what the menus do. So at least we know how to get two different parts of this menu up here, and we know that we can, bring screens down and see what they do, as well as a few things down here. So with some exploring, you should be a little bit familiar with them. And now we're going to move to modelling. So we're going to need this cube selected, which is our mesh, and it's the only mesh that's in the scene currently. And what we're going to do is we go down here, and we bring up the menu and go to Edit Mode. And this is where all the modelling is going to go on. So it's called Edit Mode, it's where all the editing, modelling, and a few different things over here are done. But I'll get to this stuff probably in the next video. What we're going to focus on right now is actually how to move the shape and get it to the correct shape that we want. And in Edit Mode we can do all that stuff with grabbing, scaling, and rotating. But what is a key point to notice is if I grab this and I move it all the way over here, and then I go back to object mode, which the quicker way to switch between object mode and edit mode is pressing tab, as it says down there in the bottom left when I press it. Tab will just switch you between them. But since we've moved this cube over here in edit mode, if we now go back to object mode, the central point of the shape is that little orange dot. So if we're rotating the shape, it's going to rotate around that orange dot, meaning the cube's way off where the center of the shape is. So probably best if we take it back into edit mode, we undo this, which is saying OS key, which just means control. If you see that down in the bottom left, we take it back to the center, and if we do want to move this shape, don't move it in edit mode unless it's required in the creation of the shape. So take it to object mode, and this is where all the moving can go along, and that orange dot will actually move along with it. So that's how that's done. And also to move around the shape we can actually click these different arrows with the left click, which I didn't mention in the previous video. But tab back into edit mode on the shape, and we'll continue looking at what we can do in edit mode. And when we right click the shape in object mode, it selects the whole shape, but in edit mode, if we right click these corners, it will select individual corners, which can be only moved, because with an individual point, rotating it isn't going to do anything, scaling it isn't going to do anything, but moving it obviously is going to push it somewhere else. Which is how we're going to get the results that we want. So when you're actually creating a shape, it's mostly done by moving the vertices around. But for instance, you want to move two vertices at once, we can press Shift and select another vertex, just like objects in edit mode, in object mode even. And we can press G to grab them both and both move them. Just like object mode, this can also be moved on the X, Y, and Z axis, so G and then X will move it just on the X axis, and then pressing G and Y will move it only on the Y axis, and so on, which we can also select as many vertices as we want. So that's how that's done. But as you saw I just did there, to select these two, it actually connects a line which is called the edge, and if we select 4, it will select a face, and that means that it can be quite slow. If you want to select a single face, clicking all 4 of the vertices is quite slow. So if we look down here on the bottom, we can actually choose 3 different modes between selecting edges, faces, and single vertices. So if we switch to face mode, we can select that face really quickly, one click, this face one click, and that face one click, which also allows us to very quickly select this entire object in only 6 clicks. So it's just kind of time and getting the best out of the time, so you can select multiple areas quicker. And the same goes for edges. If we select one edge and then we select the opposite edge on the other side, it doesn't connect the face or anywhere in between, which is also quite useful later on. And if we do change this to vertex mode, it selects the entire face as well as the 2 sides here. So yeah, that's what the kind of different modes can be used for, and obviously it'll become a little bit clearer when you get more into the modelling. Secondly, if we go back to vertex mode, we also can use things like box select, which if we press B, it'll come up with this cross here. And what we can do is if we click with the left click, it'll select all of the vertices that appear in the box. So that's quite useful, selecting quick areas really easily. But if you want to deselect specific objects from your selection, you can either do that by pressing Shift and then clicking the vertice that you want to deselect, or if you want to select areas and you want to undo that, then we can press B for box select, but also press the middle mouse button down, drag that over, and it will delete those vertices from your selection. So it will remove them from the selection, which is quite useful. But there are 2 other types of selecting which we can do. Next is C. So if we press C, we'll bring up the circle select, and what that's useful for is if we scroll the mouse button, we can change the scale, meaning we can select this entire face of vertices all at once, scale it down, and then just quickly select that one there, or maybe just those 2, which is a lot quicker. Which we can also use the middle mouse button to deselect 2 at once, deselect those 2, leaving us with just those 2. Say I want to bring that one up as well. It just makes things a little bit quicker. Again, just really easy for time saving. And the third type, less used than circle select and box select, is the lasso select. So I want to select just those 4 on the top, as well as these 2 on the bottom here. I could select them individually, or I could box select that, or I could circle select it, but it's a bit of an awkward shape, so if we want to be accurate, we can press Control and click, left click, and now we can draw the shape that we want to select, bring it back to the start, and it'll select all 4 of those, which is obviously quite useful. And there are the 3 types of selection. Next, I wanted to move on to deleting, and deleting can be done in 3, well, it comes up with a whole list of deleting selections, but the main ones are if we select a vertice and I press X to bring up the delete menu, we can delete faces, edges, or vertices, and then there are a few different objects, different things there even, but we'll ignore them for now, and we'll just focus on these top 3. And when we remove a single vertice, it'll also remove all the faces and edges that are connected. But if we go and delete an edge, an individual edge, it'll only delete that edge, meaning that those 2 faces have to disappear because there's no edge connecting them. But it won't delete the vertices, so that means these 2 faces are okay to stay. Useful, again, for a few things, but exact examples will only appear when you're actually creating objects. And finally, face deleting means we keep all the edges and we keep all the vertices, so when we press X we can delete the face and it will only remove that face, which comes in handy later. Next step to move on to would be this is the most useful thing, and it's how you're going to create any object from edit mode, and it is pressing Control R for our ring loop, which will bring up this little purple line when we hover it over individual parts. And if we click with the left click, we can actually apply this to the shape, which means it's locked to those faces. But if we move, we can move it along wherever we want, and then we left click again, and it will apply it to that area that we want right there. And now when I press Control R again, we've got the option of putting another one called ring loop here or there, and obviously to the side as well. And this is how all modelling is going to be done. For instance, if I add another one and drag it along over here, we can select the whole loop by pressing Shift and clicking all the way around, which shows a quicker way, which I'll get to. We can select the whole loop like that by getting the whole thing selected, and then we can scale this downwards. And there we've kind of got ourselves you know, a shape that we might want. So that's what we're trying to model, so that's how we modelled it. And then we can also add another ring loop here, which we want to scale up, creating that kind of a shape. So if you use them smartly, you can obviously then create whatever you wanted, moving this G and then Z, moving this upwards, creating pretty much whatever kind of shape you would want from that single cube. So we start off with a cube, and now I've got this mesh right here. Okay, so I've just reset the scene, and all we're going to do now is add one more ring loop just to show you one more thing to do with them. And that is, if we add one like this, keeping it in the purple view, then we can also use the middle mouse button to add more. So if we keep scaling it, then we keep adding more, and we can control how many we want, which will save us time eventually, and it becomes quite useful. So we can now cut this into loads really quickly, just like that, and we're obviously saving more time than doing it individually. But if we do have a ring loop and we want to save time and we've not got them selected, we can, instead of clicking each individual vertex or edge all the way around, you can actually just press Alt and right click in the middle of the edge, even if you're in vertex mode. If you just press Alt and right click in the middle of the edge, it'll select the entire ring loop, and then Alt and right click with Shift will select multiple entire ring loops. And it doesn't always recognise that it's a ring loop. It will if you've just added it. If you've just added a ring loop, it will recognise that it is a ring loop. But if you've got one in your shape and you click it and it doesn't select them all, it just doesn't recognise that it's a ring loop, and you're going to have to select it a little bit of a better way. Which I'm going to move on to now, because it is, if I add two more ring loops, or if I had a few ring loops, this is the most important thing probably in edit mode. And I've kind of been saving it until now, just because, you know, you need to know a few modelling tricks and get familiar with how to do it without this little thing. But you're literally going to be switching in and out of this mode all the time, and that is if we press Z, then we get Wireframe, which allows us to, if I'm viewing the cube from this side, I can select those vertices all the way along there, when originally from this point I can't select them because I can't see them. Which is obviously quite useful. For instance, if I go to the front view by pressing 1, as seen in the previous video, and I press A, we can press box select when we're not in wireframe mode, which is by pressing Z. We can press box select, we can select them, but when we look around, we've actually only selected the ones that were in sight. We haven't selected the rest. So if I go to the side view and I press Z for wireframe, and then I select them all, I take it out of wireframe by pressing Z again, we can see that I've selected the whole thing, which is obviously very useful. And when you get further on and you get more used to it, you'll find out uses for this and it will get a lot better. But you'll also notice that if I press Z and I zoom in, and I'm in the front view, so I'm pressing 1, we can see all the way along this edge. And if I press box select, we're going to have to drag it all the way along there, which obviously might end up not selecting all the ones that I want eventually when the shape gets more complicated. And so if we actually do want to select them all, if we remember from the last video, we can press 5 to remove perspective, and that means that I can't see any of the other vertices there. But if I press box select and I select it, we've actually selected the entire row and any of them that are behind that front one. But if we go into the front view again and we press Z, press A even, and we're not in wireframe, it still only selects the front vertice. So make sure you're in wireframe, make sure you've got no perspective by pressing 5, and from that point you can go ahead and select all the vertices really quickly. And then when we're actually modelling the shape, it's probably best not to be looking at it with no perspective, which is why it's good to put it back to the perspective view, where we can then, it's quite a lot easier to model this shape any way that we wanted with perspective. And then if we want to take it to the side, the front view, it's a lot easier just to press 5 and Z, and then we can see that we want to select them and move them out for whatever reason. That was completely random movements, but we've created a shape here quicker than doing it individually. And so that's the main things to do with ring loops, and remember wireframe, you'll be using it quite a lot. I've got 2 more things I'd like to mention, and that is, if we take it into perspective, so press 5, make sure that you're viewing it like this, and we're in edit mode, I can move my cursor still and I can add a shape, so add a mesh UV sphere, and when I add it to edit mode, it'll immediately appear in edit mode with the other cube, so I can still select the vertices on both of them. But if I go to object mode, they both, if I select this, if I deselect them, I try and just select this circle, we have to select both objects because they're part of the same object. And if I'm rotating them, they have to rotate together, and moving them, they have to move together. And that means that, I mean, obviously that's useful when you actually want them all as the same shape, but if you accidentally add them to the same shape, then obviously you don't want that. So what we can do is we can go into wireframe. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select the whole shape there, or we can press, we've pressed box select then to select the entire shape in wireframe. But if we didn't want to do that, we can also press 1 vertice and then press Ctrl L for the linked, which means that we can just only select one thing on there and it will select the entire thing, obviously making time. And then if we press space, we can type in separate, there it is, and it tells us the shortcut for that is P. So let's press P, and it comes up with its own little selection, its little pop-up menu, and then we can separate by the selection. That's the one we want to click, meaning that now if we go out of edit mode, we have put these 2 objects into separate objects. I can select them individually now if I want to. But a good thing to note is they were both part of the same object, and that central point down there was both their central points, in which case now that I've separated them, the central point for this circle is going to be all the way over there. Just a good thing to mention. And the very, very final thing to do with editing and modelling is if I take this cube here, I'm still in object mode, in edit mode even. If I add a cube and I I move it just parallel to this, then we can delete. We can go into face select mode. Make sure you delete these two faces. Oops, delete the faces, not the vertices. We can delete the two faces, take it back into vertex mode, and we can actually join these two shapes. And to do so, we need to select 3 or 4 more vertices. But before bmesh came along, you could only select 4 faces at a time and connect them. But that doesn't matter anymore. You can select as many as you want, and you can add faces. And what we can do is we can press Shift and click to select 2 different vertices, and we need 2 or more up to 4. So we selected all 4, press F, easy to remember for face, press F for face, and it will connect them with a single face. Also incredibly important for when you're modelling. The annoying thing about this is we're going to have to do it one at a time, and there isn't a really quicker way to do it. I do know a quicker way, but that's only for an add-on, so I'll ignore that for now. And press F, and finally F, and now they're completely connected, and we've got our own object, which will become incredibly useful later on. So I know I go through all this stuff really quickly, and I wanted to mention as much as I could. I mean, even though I've been talking quite fast, we've still got like a 20-minute video here, and so I'm hoping you can kind of just run through it again, and if you actually do this stuff while I do it, then you get a better idea and you get used to all the stuff, and it just becomes really easy to you. So I thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.